So the very largest event, and now the storm events for this purpose are being classified by if you have a gap of more than 24 hours without any rain, then that's the event ending and a new one starting, sort of thing. So that sort of separates one event from the other. But you can see, like that first one in blue, April 1978, it dribbled on for a long time, 9.4 days, and we got 179 millimetres. So that's the biggest event in that whole time, but it was low intensity. So we wouldn't have expected to get an awful lot of ponding or major flooding or things like that. Similar in August 75 and April 78, those events are also quite long, but they do have peaks in them with some reasonable rainfall intensities. So there might have been minor flooding in those ones. Then we come along to our favourite event in March 2014, and we all know that we got a lot of flooding out of that one. And that was a relatively short duration and pretty high intensity event. Then we come along to the next one, which would be the most severe rainstorm that Christchurch has had in this period. And it has overall about the same rainfall depth as what happened in this year, in March 2014. But it has this absolutely enormous spike in the middle. Now, the interesting thing is that that particular spike occurred not in a very isolated spot like just on that particular rain gauge, but it's also recorded in Sumner and various other gauges around the city at exactly the same time. So it was a huge event, yeah, and unfortunately we don't have a lot of very good records in terms of how our rivers responded to that particular event, but it would have been a very big event, not unlike really what we've experienced this year. And then you've got the range of the other events that you see there. Right, now what I've done is I've gone through all the record back to 1962 and pulled out all the rainstorms that have occurred, and that's them. Now I said, well, there's far too many there, we'll strip it back to just the ones bigger than 50 millimetres. So what you see is some scattered effects. There's a bit of a bunch in the middle of the 70s, and then another gap. There's quite a bunch in the 80s, and there's a trickle of events thenceforth, right up to today. And so then I started classifying those in terms of your favourite return intervals. And so you'll see there a few of them are 5 years and 6 years, 9 years, less than 2 years. The 1992 one you can see flagged near the centre of the picture at the top was a snow event, and if you put it into the context of rainfall intensity and time and things like that, it would be something like a 6-year event. If you have a look towards the right at the top, that's the 100-year event in March this year. And you see a few other events down below that, 6-year, 2-year, 9-year, 8-year, 3-year, and one at less than 2-year. Most of those, other than the one less than 2-year, caused some sort of flooding. There was also an event there which I've labelled as 3 years and 4.5 days, and that was a reasonable size of event, over 4.5 days, and it was pre-earthquake, and I guess it didn't cause that much flooding. I'm not aware of any flooding records from it. So, yep.
Was that because it was over such a long period of time that it doesn't?
1973. Oh, I haven't bothered analysing that one.
So would that, given that it's on the same level as 2013, be a 100-year event?
The one in 73, well, it's near 73. That would be that very intense one that I talked about before.
So would that be a 100-year event?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So 2 of them within 30 years so far.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Right, moving on. Now, what I've tried to do, particularly focusing around the idea of why we're getting so much flooding in Flockton Basin, for example. And our modellers were saying to us, well, if you get rainfall intensities more than about 44 millimetres per hour, you're likely to get, the channels probably won't be large enough to actually convey that. So the idea should be, well, you should be on edge in terms of potential flooding. Now clearly, if you only get 4 millimetres in a storm, that's not going to be enough to wet anything. So I've just scanned the data and looked at 40 millimetres in 10 hours as being, you know, a moderately intense storm with some reasonable rainfall depth. And I plotted those along the same sort of scale, and you can see in green on this one the number of times that sort of a threshold is met, and you'll see a few of them in the last year and a few gaps and so on, but they don't really seem to zero in on the times that we've had flood events. So I started looking for other ways of doing that. Before I did that, I looked at a rain gauge which was actually closer to Flockton Basin and said, well, okay, what about that particular rain gauge? Does that trigger these sorts of things? And again, it didn't really zero in well enough. Then I started looking at other types of events, greater depths over greater times, and after trying a few different combinations, I got onto 75 millimetres in 40 hours. And what that seemed to do, it seemed to zero in on pretty much all the events that we've had. And so you'll see the ones shown there in red dots. And so we've had 4 events in this year. We had 1 event in 2013, we had 1 event in 2012. Then we had to go back to 1999 before we would have the same combination of events in 1994, 1992, 3 in 1986, and you can see a bunch there in the 70s, including 2 in 1975, and then a trickle of them back to 1961. So I'm just trying to, you know, for people who have been around Christchurch, and most of us have, I suspect you can probably relate to this in terms of, okay, yep, they seem to be the times when we actually had these flooding events. So, you know, what does all this mean, really? And I guess my analysis of this really is that the frequency of these events is about the frequency of the rainfall, and it's not directly related to the earthquake event that we've had. But what has happened with the earthquake is that the impact of a flooding event might be a bit worse, but the frequency is really about the rainfall that we've had. And we have just had an unusually high number of flood-producing storms this year, extremely unusual, and indeed, since the earthquake, we've had several of these, at least 6, right? And that relates pretty well to what's happening in Flockton Basin.
Just because you mentioned about the earthquake, and we've had these, and you've got these going right through for the 30-odd years or longer. It has to be a fact that the earthquake has significantly changed some of the areas in the city, because I mean, I can remember, you know, I've been brought up around the Heathcote River all my life, and I do remember flood events, but it does seem to be more intense now, whether it's my age and fading memory, but the fact of the matter is there are areas that weren't flooded or didn't seem to flood as often as possible. You know, we've got people that have been flooded 3 times or 6 times. One family's flooded 6 times.
Yeah, well, there you go. That's what I'm saying.
Yep.
We've had 6 events since the earthquake where I would have expected flooding under this sort of little regime. And a big period, you know, right back to 1999, till that sort of event would have occurred before. So there's been, I think, some reasonable coincidence here in terms of when the earthquakes occurred and when we've actually got these particular flood-producing storms. If I can, I'll just take you to one more slide, just for a bit of fun here. So here's our Flockton Basin, and if you can get your minds around that one. This thing shoot that far? Oh yes it will. So Flockton Basin up here, Dudley Creek, cruising around and into the Avon River channel in this area here. And the Avon River channel in this area here is tidal. Up to the right, we've got Horseshoe Lake, just so that you understand the geography of the area. Now that's pre-earthquake situation, and I press a wee button here. Hopefully that changes to the post-earthquake situation. Whoops, yes, there it does. We'll go back and we'll do a couple of back and forwards here. So there you go, pre-earthquake, post-earthquake. Pre-earthquake, post-earthquake. So, well, it shows you the fact that the land has deformed, and the thing is that if you look at the amount of blue space, if you like, in the Flockton Basin area, you'll see that in the post-earthquake situation, it's quite a lot more than what it was before. And the issue there is the land has actually dropped there, but the outflow of Dudley Creek into the Avon River is at exactly the same level as it was before, because it's driven by the tide. The tide hasn't changed, but the level of Flockton Basin has. It's dropped. So the slope on the channel to get the water out is not as great as what it was before.
But,
Those two.
Yeah.
Where you've got that green bit that goes blue, basically,
Yeah.
is that the area that is most impacted recently?
Yes, it is.
Right, okay, thank you. So it's a clear correlation between the drop
Yeah.
and the impact?
Yeah.
Okay,
That's right.
thank you.
Yeah. What I'm just reiterating, what I'm saying is that the impact is greater, but the frequency is driven by the rainfall.
have we got one of these maps for the estuary and Heathcote River basins right up to, say, around, say, Princess Margaret up to that?
Oh, I don't actually have one, but I mean, it's possible to generate such a thing.
Because, I mean, with regards to, say, the estuary, we've been told that on the hillside of the estuary it's risen between 400 and 600 or whatever, and it's so the capacity for that basin, the estuary basin, to take water in a flood situation has to have been reduced. Therefore, that would affect whether it's rain and combined with tide and etc. would have to be an impact onto those river basins, both the Avon and especially the Heathcote.
Yeah, no, I'd beg to differ on that. And the reason is that the estuary itself is quite large, and it's very closely linked to the open sea. The levels within the estuary match very closely, maximum tide levels, things like that, match very closely to the levels that we've got recorded at Sumner Head, which is obviously connected directly to the open sea. And so the flow resistance, if you like, through the estuary from any floods which are coming out of either the Avon or the Heathcote or the other small channels that go in there are not really restricted by any restrictions within the estuary itself.
But you could almost say that if you look, say, on the Heathcote River and you look at, say, the Colombo Street Bridge, it's a quite tight bridge and you've got a wide section up river, and that floods, you know, there's obviously a jam point there. That could be exactly that's the same principle as the entrance to the sea from the estuary. So you've got a wide plain going into a very small hole, and so you can relate that back further and further upstream. Is that? I mean, it'd be very interesting to see this type of mapping for the estuary and Heathcote Basin.
Yeah, the Colombo Street Bridge is well above the tidal effects, really. Tidal effects go up to about as far as Fitzgerald Avenue Bridge, and Colombo Street's quite a lot higher than that.
I was talking the Fitzgerald Avenue Bridge is on the Avon. The Heathcote River
the
Colombo Bridge. Sorry,
Heathcote one. Okay, the Heathcote one Buxton Terrace is about as far as the tide goes up in the Heathcote River.
So anything technically above Buxton Terrace on the Heathcote is rain related?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. You'll stay with us, won't you?
Yep. Okay.
Look, thanks for that, Graham, but I'm still left thinking that in terms of people's understanding of this, because the incidents per 100 years or over a period of years can be quite different, and the intent that's based on the intensity of the rainfall, say, that can be quite different on the impact compared with the impact across Christchurch of flooding, say, on people, and it's sort of the impact of the flooding, which in fact people notice and are concerned about, and so it just seems to me, from what you said, still that isn't a useful indicator for people's understanding.
I think you're right. It's confusing for people because it's very site specific, and you know, if you wanted to do a 100-year return interval on something, let's say at the gauge at Gloucester Street, you can be very specific about it. You've got all the records there, and you can say this is the highest level that's occurred in 100 years, and so on and so on. You can be very specific about it. But then you say, okay, that particular flooding event at Gloucester Street was a 100-year one, but let's go into the Heathcote River. It didn't occur there, or it didn't occur in the Styx River, but it was the same storm event, you know.
So look, what we change.
Well, perhaps,
Is that a possibility, please?
no,
Brigitte?
not really. And I'll just explain why. In order to have any rules related to flooding, we have to have some kind of standard measurement. And the year recurrence periods are what's used throughout New Zealand. They are the level of rainfall that determines each of those recurrence periods is dealt with at a national basis. And so we can only write rules around something where we have something to hang our hat on. In order for it to get down to street level types of recurrence or specificity that Graham is talking about, that's necessary for operational matters, perhaps up to the 20-year flood level. But we're talking about a district plan review where we are required to have certain rules for certain recurrent periods, not only through the regional policy statement, but also through LERP. So we are actually bound to use these particular types of standards for reasons that you'll see once we start to get into the rules relating to flooding.
I guess that could follow as other towns and districts change their plans and are also facing climate change and the effects and impacts of flooding. They're going to be faced with the same thing. So in fact,
absolutely,
at some stage at a national level, this would need to change.
That's correct, and that's why you have district plan reviews regularly and even council-initiated plan changes if information and technology changes. But at the moment, that's what we use for our standards to sort of hang our various rules around.
Perhaps we could get Graham to just explain the 1 in 200 mapping and modelling that's been done to actually reflect the map that we've ended up with, and compare it to what you've been doing site-specific and talking about down there, that's a 1 in 100. How do you do that at the wider district level?
Speak into the microphone, Graham.
Yeah, okay, I'm just wondering about the question over here.
Yeah, I guess my question would be, the problem is, I'm not sure that Christchurch is comparable any longer, given the fact that the seismic twist of the land, the uprising of the hills, the land dropping. Nowhere else in New Zealand has had that. So how can we still fit into that national framework?
Yeah, but
because the problem is, as Phil's saying, I don't think it's still having that grip with the community. That
I can understand. I can understand the credibility has been tarnished with the community. I can understand that. But we, getting back to what was said a moment ago. We have to have some sort of a standard to start with, and these maps have been generated using a rainfall, which is statistically a 200-year event, and applied uniformly right across the city, which is quite different to a natural event, which can be quite variable across the city, things like that, and a lot more confusing. So in order to create these maps, we have a standardised way of proceeding forward.
Which is to do with rainfall. That's not to say that the effects of that rainfall have differed in some areas because of the rise and fall of the land. But the actual standard is around rainfall.
Therein lies the flaw, I think, for us, because the other part of the equation is the land. And our land isn't the same as...
Well, it's
country.
even a lot more complicated than that, because you've got situations where you get a storm coming along and, you know, the previous month has been dry as a bone, and the effect of it is minimal. Whereas of late, you know, we've had a storm when the land has already been soaking, so the effect of it is a lot greater. You know, so it's a complicated situation.
However, we are required to deal with these natural hazards in the city plan through law, through the Resource Management Act, as well as through those other pieces of planning that I've just discussed. So what we'll do now is
I've got a quick question,
beg your pardon.
and I don't want to throw something depressing over the top of what's already quite depressing. If you actually look at that map, the flood management map, and you take into consideration what science is telling us about sea level rise, you could in actual fact say that's the new coastline. Couldn't you?
Not exactly, because in the bottom part of it, that would be true. If you just simply added on the tidal areas, but as you go up the rivers, then it's affected by the water flowing off. So that you wouldn't expect that would, you know, it wouldn't be wet just from the tide back up into the city.
But your tide, actually, the tidal effects, you said Buxton Terrace, and if you take the Avon River, it's about the same distance, which is around Central City. That's where the tidal effects take effect, right up to those points. So it is a fair way in.
Tidal effects go right up to Fitzgerald Ave.
Yep,
Bridge.
correct. Yep, and Buxton Terrace. Yep.
Yeah, but within the river, not necessarily on the sides of the river. Yeah.
Just to comment on the maps, everything we've seen today and everything we've been given out relates to the city, and there are no maps for Banks Peninsula. I'd be particularly interested to see what these maps look like for Little River around flooding and Akaroa around sea level rise. And I also noticed the Banks Peninsula maps are missing from the booklet as well. It's quite important, I think, that we have the context on the peninsula too.
Yeah, the flood management areas to date have been mapped for Christchurch City, but we haven't done 1 in 200 year flood modelling for Banks Peninsula. So that's sort of historically they've used historic flood levels to limit building near flood areas. But I understand that's part of the program for phase 2 that we would do the Banks Peninsula and try and map it at the same consistent way that we've mapped it for Christchurch City. But whether that work can be done in time for stage 2 is another question. But certainly we've got flood provisions in the operative plan for Banks Peninsula, and in this particular phase we don't have much other than policies.
So does that mean that the existing Banks Peninsula district plan will just translate directly into the new plan with that historic information?
No, I think what we would do, we look at it in phase 2 to try and include a review of the Banks Peninsula information so that we can do something like similar to this, perhaps not quite so sophisticated because of the information limitations, but trying to bring the flood management area concept into the Banks Peninsula plan because it's not there at the moment. Right. So in phase 2, we would look at it being part of the proposed district plan, phase 2.
But the objectives and policies of this chapter would stand for Banks Peninsula.
Okay, great, thank you.
I was just going to go over and explain these maps.
First one that you put up on the Waimak flood basin, which was pretty amazing. The one right at the beginning, where you had the Waimak flood area.
Oh, yes. Showing the whole of the city inundated.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
What actually is there sufficient natural protection or stop bank protection or any form of protection? Yeah, that one. To actually stop that happening, or what degree of rainfall cause or anything else causes that?
That's the 1 in 500. Yeah, you can explain it's 1 in.
Yeah. Okay. What you're seeing there is the natural floodplain of the Waimakiriri River, and the darker areas are where you might conceivably get deeper water, and the lighter areas shallower water. The protection that Environment Canterbury has put along the river is quite intensive. There is a primary stop bank and a secondary stop bank behind that. The primary stop bank has been there for perhaps 40 or 50 years now, and it was breached once in the 1950s, and hence the additional protection of a secondary stop bank behind that again, so that if the first one gets breached, water can travel into the intervening space and also exit back out again, and it would have to breach the second one before it came through that. So the level, and you'll love this, the level of the stop banks are such as to protect against flooding from a 1 in 10,000 year event, which in terms of a flooding, and just in terms of flooding level, but it's acknowledged that that's not the only form of failure of a stop bank. A stop bank could have failed by virtue of erosion or something like that. So, you know, the actual level of protection may be something less than that.
Has the secondary stop bank system been completed yet?
Well, I think it's close
I
to
don't think
completion.
it
If
has.
it's not,
It's still gaps
in
to be,
progress, isn't it? It's in progress.